From JBS Studios in Greater New York, this is the JBS News Update with Teisha Bader.
I'm Teisha Bader with the JBS News Update for Wednesday, June the 14th, 2017. U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson suggested that the Palestinian Authority plan to stop the monthly stipends they pay out to the families of convicted Palestinian terrorists. In a hearing at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee yesterday, Tillerson said the issue had been discussed with Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas.
It was discussed directly when President Abbas made his visit with his delegation to Washington. The president raised it, but then I had a bilateral, much more detailed bilateral with him later that day, and I told him, you absolutely must stop making payments to family members of, quote, martyrs. I said, it's one thing to help orphans and children, but when you designate the payment for that act, that has to stop. They have changed their policy. At least I have been informed they've changed that policy, and their intent is to cease the payments to the family members of those who have committed murder or violence against others. So we've been very clear with them that this is simply not acceptable to us. It is certainly not acceptable to the American people.
However, both the PA and Israel maintain that nothing has changed in the PA's policy. Palestinian Minister of Prisoner Affairs Issa Karake told the Times of Israel, "We reject ending the subsidies to the prisoners and families of martyrs. We will not apologize for it," calling the pressure from the U.S. and Israel to stop the payments an aggression. Israel's Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman told Israel Radio Today that he had not seen any indication that the PA plans to stop these payments to convicted terrorists and their families. And Israel's Knesset approved the preliminary reading of a bill today that would cut funds paid to the PA because of those stipends. Responding to Tillerson's remarks yesterday, CEO of the American Jewish Committee, David Harris, said that creating monetary incentives for terrorists is a key factor impeding the peace process and nurturing a Palestinian culture of violence and hatred. Harris said if a firm U.S. stance actually leads to the end of this outrageous practice, as Secretary Tillerson said will be the case, AJC would be the first to applaud. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu left Israel today for a trilateral meeting in Greece. Netanyahu will meet in Thessaloniki with Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras, as well as with the President of Cyprus, Nikos Anastasiades. Several Israeli ministers are accompanying the Prime Minister and will meet with their counterparts to sign agreements in the areas of science, energy, and environmental protection, among others. Thessaloniki was once home to a vibrant Jewish community, which was almost completely decimated during the Holocaust. And while he is there, Netanyahu will attend the opening ceremony of a Holocaust museum in the port city. And by the way, flying the Prime Minister to Greece was El Al pilot Nechama Spiegel Novak. She is said to be the first ultra-Orthodox or Haredi woman to do so. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley strongly criticized a report released this week by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights against Israel. The report accuses both Israel as well as the Palestinians of not investigating war crimes, but strongly fixates on Israel for its, quote, repeated failure in this regard. Haley said yesterday that this report is just the latest example of the Human Rights Council singling out Israel rather than focusing on the world's actual human rights abusers. She said not only does it undermine the credibility of the Human Rights Council on human rights issues, but it once again highlights the unfair bias of the UN when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The man responsible for some 8 bomb threats against Jewish community centers and the New York offices of the Anti-Defamation League earlier this year took responsibility for his actions, facing a New York courtroom yesterday. 32-year-old Juan Thompson pled guilty to charges of cyber-stalking and making false bomb threats, saying he did so in order to disrupt his ex-girlfriend's life and cause her, quote, great distress. Although Thompson first denied his guilt back in April, he told the district court in Manhattan yesterday that he deeply apologized. The threats occurred at the beginning of the year in the midst of a wave of bomb threats against JCCs and other Jewish institutions that were later found to be mostly the work of an Israeli teenager who also holds U.S. citizenship. Thompson's actions were seen as a copycat crime for which he faces up to 10 years in prison and is going to be sentenced in September. Well, the southwest corner of 84th Street and Central Park West in New York City has a new name, Elie Wiesel Way. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio led a special ceremony yesterday to honor and remember the Nobel Peace Prize laureate, Holocaust survivor, and author, along with members of Wiesel's family. The mayor called Wiesel perhaps the most eloquent voice for peace in our world, saying New York City is proud to honor his memory. Elie Wiesel died almost 1 year ago in New York City on July the 2nd at the age of 87. And taking a look now at our programming for tonight on JBS for Wednesday, June the 14th. At 7 o'clock, a look at Israeli social justice. At 8, author and Holocaust survivor Moshe Avital shares his story of survival in a program of Manhattan Jewish Experience and Young Friends of the Museum of Jewish Heritage. At 9 tonight, Mark Golub sits down with pro-Israel activist Chloe Valdary on L'chaim, and at 10, Israeli author Dorit Rabinyan talks about her book, All the Rivers, which has been banned by some high schools in Israel. And coming up right after this newscast tonight, it's Thinking Out Loud with Micah Halpern. And that's the JBS News Update for Wednesday, June the 14th, 2017. I'm Teisha Bader.